There is a theater that never closes. Its stage is everywhere, in boardrooms and bedrooms, in family dinners and first dates, in the quiet moments before sleep when we replay the day's performances. The actors never rest because the show never ends. And the most fascinating part? Most of them don't even know they're performing. You see it every day, though you might not name it. The colleague who smiles while sharpening knives behind their back. The friend who offers help but keeps a ledger of debts. The lover who whispers sweet words while calculating their next move. The parent who gives with one hand and takes with the other. These are not villains in some distant story. They are us. They are everyone we know. They are the human condition dressed in its finest costume. Machiavelli understood something that Freud spent decades trying to excavate from the unconscious. Power is not an aberration of human nature. It is human nature, the desire to control, to influence, to shape the world according to our will. This is not the domain of tyrants and sociopaths. It is the quiet hum beneath every interaction, every relationship, every moment when two human beings occupy the same space and must negotiate who leads and who follows. Before we continue, a warning. The knowledge that's about to be shared cannot be unlearned. It will permanently change the way you see human relationships. If you're ready to abandon comfortable illusions and see what's behind the stage, subscribe now. Because this isn't just a video. It's the beginning of your journey under the mask. Now let us begin. Picture a woman sitting across from her husband at dinner. The table is set with care. Candles flicker between them, casting shadows that dance across their faces. She asks him about his day. Her voice soft, genuinely interested. He answers, relaxing into the warmth of her attention. She laughs at his jokes, touches his hand, leans forward when he speaks. To anyone watching, this is love. This is intimacy. This is what we all hope to find. But watch her eyes. Really watch them. There's a calculation happening behind the warmth, a subtle assessment of his mood, his defenses, his vulnerabilities. She's not doing this consciously. She doesn't think of herself as manipulative. If you asked her, she would say she loves her husband, and she would mean it. But love and strategy are not opposites. They are dance partners, moving together in a choreography so ancient and instinctive that we mistake it for spontaneity. 20 minutes into dinner, she mentions, almost casually, that she saw a beautiful house today. Just in passing. Just a thought. She describes it with the kind of detail that makes it real, makes it possible. 3 bedrooms, a garden, closer to her mother. She watches his face as she speaks, reading the micro-expressions that flicker across it. Resistance, concern, the tightening around his eyes that means he's thinking about money. She doesn't push. Not yet. She simply plants the seed and waters it with silence, letting it grow in the space between them. This is not cruelty. This is not even dishonesty. Not in the way we usually define it. This is survival. This is the art of getting what you need in a world that doesn't simply hand it to you. Machiavelli would recognize this woman instantly. Not as a villain, but as a realist. Someone who understands that power in relationships is not about domination. It's about influence. It's about creating conditions where the other person chooses what you want them to choose, and believes it was their idea all along. Freud would dig into her childhood, searching for the wound that made her this way. He would ask about her father, her mother, the moment when trust was broken and strategy became necessary. And he might find something there, some explanation, some origin story. But Machiavelli would simply nod and say, "This is how humans are. This is how we've always been." The question is not why we wear masks. The question is whether we're conscious enough to choose which mask to wear. Now shift the scene. A young man walks into a job interview. He's prepared. He's researched the company, memorized talking points, practiced his handshake in the mirror. He sits down across from the interviewer and becomes someone else. Not entirely. The foundation is still him, but he's turned up certain qualities and dimmed others. His natural introversion becomes thoughtful listening. His anxiety becomes passionate intensity. His desperate need for this job becomes calm confidence. Is he lying? We want to say yes. We want to draw a clear line between authenticity and performance. But the truth is more complicated, more interesting, more human. He is both real and constructed. The person he's presenting is a version of himself, a possibility of who he could be under the right circumstances. The mask he wears is not false. It's aspirational. It's the self he hopes to grow into if given the chance. The interviewer asks him about his weaknesses. This is the moment. This is the test. He's prepared for this too. He offers a weakness that's really a strength in disguise. I'm too much of a perfectionist. I work too hard. I care too much about the details. The interviewer nods, writing something down. They've heard this answer 1,000 times. They know it's a performance. But here's the secret. They don't care. They're performing too. This entire interaction is theater. Both parties know it. Both parties accept it. Because this is how the game is played. What Machiavelli understood, what makes him so uncomfortable to read even 500 years later, is that morality and effectiveness are not the same thing. We want them to be. We want to believe that good people succeed and bad people fail, that honesty is always the best policy, that the universe rewards virtue. But Machiavelli looked at the world as it actually is, not as we wish it to be. And what he saw was that power goes to those who understand its mechanisms, regardless of whether they're good or bad, honest or deceptive, kind or cruel. This doesn't mean morality doesn't matter. It means morality is more complex than we pretend. The woman at dinner loves her husband. The young man at the interview is genuinely qualified for the job. They're not villains. They're not even unusual. They're simply awake to the reality that every human interaction involves negotiation, strategy, and the careful management of perception. Consider the child who learns early that tears bring comfort, that certain behaviors earn praise, while others bring punishment. Is this manipulation, or is this learning? The child is not consciously scheming. They're simply adapting to their environment, discovering which versions of themselves are rewarded and which are rejected. By the time they're adults, these strategies are so deeply embedded that they feel like personality, like identity, like truth. Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to navigate the social world. But he also warned about the shadow, all the parts of ourselves we hide behind that mask. The anger we're not allowed to express, the desires we're taught to be ashamed of, the selfishness that contradicts our self-image as good people. The shadow doesn't disappear just because we refuse to look at it. It leaks out in passive aggression, in unconscious sabotage, in the gap between what we say we value and what we actually do. The most dangerous people are not those who consciously manipulate. They're predictable. You can see them coming. The most dangerous people are those who manipulate unconsciously, who genuinely believe their own performance, who have worn the mask so long they've forgotten there's a face underneath. They hurt people while believing they're helping. They control while calling it love. They take while insisting they're giving. And when confronted, they're genuinely confused, genuinely wounded, because in their story, they're the hero. Let's go deeper. Let's talk about the mechanisms, the specific techniques that humans use to influence each other, often without realizing they're doing it. These are not tricks you learn from a book. These are patterns embedded in our social DNA, refined over thousands of generations of living in groups where survival depended on reading others and being read correctly. First, there's mirroring. Watch two people who are connecting, really connecting. They start to match each other. Their posture aligns. Their speech patterns synchronize. One leans forward, the other follows. One crosses their legs, the other mirrors the gesture moments later. This happens automatically, unconsciously. It's how we signal belonging, how we say without words, I am like you. You are safe with me. We are part of the same tribe. But once you know this pattern exists, you can use it deliberately. Salespeople do it. Therapists do it. Anyone who needs to build rapport quickly learns to mirror the other person's body language, their tone, their energy level. It works because it bypasses conscious thought and speaks directly to the ancient parts of our brain that are always asking, is this person friend or foe? When someone mirrors us, something in us relaxes. We feel understood. We feel seen. And in that moment of relaxation, we become more open, more trusting, more willing to say yes. Is this manipulation? That depends on intent. If you mirror someone to build genuine connection, to understand them better, to create space for real communication, then perhaps it's simply skillful interaction. But if you mirror someone to lower their defenses, so you can sell them something they don't need or convince them of something that serves only you, then yes, it crosses into manipulation. The technique is neutral. The ethics depend on what you do with it. Second, there's reciprocity. Humans are hardwired to return favors. If someone gives us something, we feel obligated to give something back. This is not weakness. This is the foundation of social cooperation. Without reciprocity, communities fall apart. But like all social instincts, it can be exploited. The person who does you an unsolicited favor is not always being generous. Sometimes they're making an investment. They're creating a debt that they'll call in later, often with interest. You didn't ask for the favor. You might not have even wanted it. But now you owe them, and something in you knows it. When they come asking for something in return, something much larger than what they gave, you feel the pull of obligation. You feel like refusing would make you ungrateful, would make you a bad person. This is how abusive relationships often work. The abuser gives intensely at the beginning. Gifts, attention, declarations of love that feel overwhelming in their intensity. The recipient feels special, chosen, indebted. And when the abuse starts, when the demands begin, when the control tightens, there's this voice that says, "But look at everything they've done for me. How can I leave? How can I be so ungrateful?" The initial generosity wasn't love. It was investment. It was the creation of a debt that could never be fully repaid. Third, there's scarcity. We want what we can't have. We value what's rare. This is why limited time offers work. This is why playing hard to get works. This is why the moment someone starts to pull away, they suddenly become more attractive, more desirable, more important. Our brains are wired to pursue what's scarce because in our evolutionary past, scarce things were often essential for survival. Food, water, mates, safety. If something was abundant, you could get it anytime. If something was scarce, you had to act now or lose your chance. Modern humans still carry this wiring, but now it gets triggered by things that aren't actually scarce. The person who texts back slowly, making you wait, making you wonder. They're not necessarily busy. They're creating artificial scarcity, making their attention seem more valuable by rationing it. The company that says only 5 spots left, act now. There might be unlimited spots, but the perception of scarcity triggers urgency, bypasses rational thought, makes you act on impulse rather than reflection. Fourth, there's social proof. We look to others to determine what's correct, what's valuable, what's worth doing. If everyone else is doing something, it must be right. If everyone else wants something, it must be valuable. This is not stupidity. This is efficient decision-making. We can't personally verify every choice, every belief, every action. So we use the crowd as a shortcut. Usually it works. Usually, the crowd is right, or at least not catastrophically wrong. But this instinct can be manipulated. Fake reviews, paid audiences, manufactured consensus, the appearance of popularity creating actual popularity. The person who name drops, who casually mentions all the important people who want their time, who trust their judgment, who value their opinion. They're not just bragging. They're leveraging social proof. They're saying, all these people think I'm valuable, so you should too. And it works. Even when we know it's a technique, even when we're aware of the manipulation, it still works because the instinct runs deeper than conscious thought. Fifth, and perhaps most powerful, there's the manipulation of identity. We don't just want things. We want to be certain kinds of people. We want to see ourselves as good, as smart, as consistent, as special. And once we've committed to an identity, once we've declared who we are, we feel pressure to act in ways that confirm that identity, even when it's not in our best interest. The person who gets you to make a small commitment is setting you up for a larger one. They get you to agree to something minor, something that seems harmless. And in agreeing, you've made a statement about who you are. You're the kind of person who supports this cause, who believes this thing, who acts this way. Later, when they come back with a bigger ask, refusing would mean contradicting your earlier statement. It would mean admitting you were wrong, or inconsistent, or not really the person you claim to be. So you say yes again, and the commitment deepens, and the identity solidifies, and before you know it, you're doing things you never intended to do, believing things you never meant to believe, All because you wanted to be consistent with a self-image that someone else helped you construct. This is how cults work. This is how extremist groups work. This is how any group that wants to control its members works. They don't start with the extreme stuff. They start with something reasonable, something you can agree with. And each agreement is a brick in the wall of your new identity. By the time they ask you to do something truly harmful, truly irrational, you're so invested in being part of the group, in being the person you've claimed to be, that refusing feels like losing yourself. But here's what makes all of this truly fascinating, truly disturbing, truly human. These techniques don't just work on others. They work on us. We manipulate ourselves constantly. We tell ourselves stories about who we are, what we want, why we do what we do. And these stories are often just as constructed, just as strategic, just as divorced from reality as the masks we show others. The person who says they're staying in a bad relationship for the kids is often staying because they're afraid of being alone. The person who says they're working 80 hours a week because they're passionate about their career is often running from something they don't want to face at home. The person who says they don't care what others think is often the person who cares most desperately. We lie to ourselves because the truth is uncomfortable, because admitting what we really want or really fear would shatter the self-image we've carefully constructed. Freud called these defense mechanisms: rationalization, projection, denial, sublimation. Ways we protect ourselves from truths we're not ready to face. But Machiavelli would say these aren't just defenses. They're strategies. They're ways we maintain the internal coherence necessary to function, to make decisions, to move through the world without being paralyzed by self-doubt and existential terror. Think about the last time you did something you're not proud of. Maybe you snapped at someone who didn't deserve it. Maybe you broke a promise. Maybe you chose your comfort over someone else's need. What story did you tell yourself afterward? Did you admit, I was selfish, I was cruel, I was weak? Or did you find reasons, explanations, contexts that made your behavior understandable, even justified? This is not dishonesty. This is survival. Because if we truly saw ourselves clearly, if we acknowledged every selfish impulse, every cruel thought, every moment of cowardice, we might not be able to get out of bed in the morning. So we construct a narrative. We're the hero of our own story. And in that story, everything we do makes sense. Everything we do is necessary. Everything we do is, if not good, then at least understandable given the circumstances. The people who hurt us are villains. The people we hurt had it coming, or didn't really suffer, or will be better off in the long run. We're not lying. We genuinely believe these stories. We have to. The alternative is unbearable. But here's the cost. When we can't see ourselves clearly, we can't change. When we can't admit our patterns, we're doomed to repeat them. The person who insists they're not controlling is often the most controlling. The person who insists they're not manipulative is often the most manipulative. Not because they're lying, but because they've constructed an identity that can't accommodate that truth. And so they keep doing the thing they insist they don't do. Hurting people while believing they're helping, taking while believing they're giving, controlling while calling it love. This is the shadow Jung warned about. The parts of ourselves we refuse to see don't disappear. They grow stronger in the darkness. They leak out in ways we don't recognize. They sabotage our relationships, our careers, our happiness. And we blame everyone else. We blame circumstances. We blame bad luck. We never look at the common denominator in all our failed relationships, all our repeated mistakes, all our patterns of suffering. We never look at ourselves. So what's the answer? If everyone is performing, if everyone is manipulating, if everyone is wearing masks, what's real? What's authentic? What's true? Machiavelli would say the question itself is naive. Authenticity is not the absence of performance. It's the conscious choice of which performance to give. The person who claims to be completely authentic, completely unfiltered, completely real, is often the most deluded. Because they're performing authenticity. They're wearing the mask of masklessness. And that might be the most manipulative mask of all, because it claims to be no mask at all. Real authenticity, if such a thing exists, is not about revealing everything. It's about knowing what you're hiding and why. It's about being conscious of your masks instead of being controlled by them. It's about choosing your performance based on your values. not just your immediate self-interest. It's about recognizing that you're always on stage, always playing a role, and taking responsibility for the role you choose to play. The woman at dinner can love her husband and still strategize about the house. These are not contradictions. Love is not the absence of self-interest. It's the negotiation between self-interest and care for another. The young man at the interview can be genuine and still perform. The self he presents is real, even if it's not complete. We're all multiple selves, multiple possibilities. The question is not which one is real. The question is which one we choose to cultivate, which one we choose to become. This is where Machiavelli and Jung actually agree, though they'd never admit it. Machiavelli says power goes to those who understand its mechanisms. Jung says wholeness comes to those who integrate their shadow. Both are saying the same thing. Consciousness is power. Knowing yourself, really knowing yourself, including the parts you'd rather not see, gives you choice. And choice is the only real freedom we have. Let's examine this through a specific case. A man we'll call David. David considers himself a good person. He volunteers. He recycles. He's polite to waiters. He donates to charity. If you asked him to describe himself, he'd use words like kind, empathetic, generous. And he'd believe it. His self-image is built on these qualities. But watch David in his relationship. His girlfriend, Sarah, wants to go back to school. She's been talking about it for months. She's excited, energized, more alive than he's seen her in years. But David feels something tighten in his chest when she talks about it. He doesn't name it as fear. He doesn't recognize it as the terror of losing control, of her becoming more independent, of her outgrowing him. Instead, he feels concern, genuine concern. He worries about the cost. He worries about the time commitment. He worries about whether she's really thought this through. So he asks questions, reasonable questions. Have you looked at the tuition? How will you balance work and school? Are you sure this is the right time? Each question is a small weight added to her excitement. Each question introduces doubt. He's not saying no. He's not forbidding anything. He's just being practical. He's just looking out for her. He's just making sure she's considered all the angles. Sarah starts to deflate. The excitement dims. She starts to second-guess herself. Maybe he's right. Maybe it is too expensive. Maybe it is bad timing. Maybe she hasn't thought it through. She decides to wait. Just for now. Just until things are more stable. David feels relief, and underneath that, satisfaction. But he doesn't recognize it as satisfaction at maintaining control. He experiences it as relief that Sarah isn't making a mistake. He genuinely believes he's helped her. He genuinely believes he's been supportive. This is unconscious manipulation at its most insidious. David is not a villain. He's not consciously trying to control Sarah, but his fear, his insecurity, his need to maintain the relationship as it is, these things operate through him without his awareness. He uses reasonable concerns as weapons. He uses love as justification for control. And because he's unconscious of what he's doing, he can't be held accountable. He can't even hold himself accountable. In his story, he's the caring boyfriend who saved his girlfriend from a bad decision. Now imagine David becomes conscious. Imagine he recognizes the fear when it arises. Imagine he names it. I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid you'll outgrow me. I'm afraid of change. This is terrifying. This is vulnerable. This is real. And in that moment of recognition, he has a choice. He can still express his concerns about tuition and timing. But now he knows what's driving those concerns. He knows the difference between genuine practical worry and fear disguised as practicality. With that knowledge, he might say something different. He might say, I'm scared, but I want you to do this. I'm scared, and I'm going to work on that fear instead of making it your problem. I'm scared, and I'm going to support you anyway because your growth matters more than my comfort. This is not easy. This is not natural. This requires going against every instinct that says protect yourself, maintain control, keep things safe and predictable. But this is also the only path to real intimacy. Because intimacy is not about finding someone who never threatens you. It's about choosing to be vulnerable with someone even though they could hurt you. It's about letting them grow even though they might grow away from you. It's about loving them more than you fear losing them. Machiavelli never wrote about love. He wrote about power, about politics, about how to gain and maintain control. But his insights apply everywhere humans interact, including in our most intimate relationships. Because love without power dynamics is fantasy. Every relationship involves negotiation. Who decides where to live? How to spend money? How to raise children? How to spend time? These are not just practical questions. They're questions of power. And pretending they're not. Pretending that love means the absence of conflict or negotiation or self-interest. That's not idealism. That's naivety. And naivety in relationships leads to resentment, to passive aggression, to the slow poison of unspoken needs and unacknowledged conflicts. The healthy relationship is not one without power dynamics. It's one where both people are conscious of those dynamics. Where both people can say, I want this, and you want that. And we need to figure out how to honor both needs. Where both people can admit, I'm being selfish right now, or I'm trying to control the situation, or I'm afraid, and that fear is making me act in ways I'm not proud of. This level of honesty is rare. It's uncomfortable. It requires killing the fantasy of perfect love, perfect compatibility, perfect harmony. But it's the only foundation for something real. Consider another scenario. A mother and her adult daughter. The mother has always been involved in her daughter's life. Deeply involved. She calls every day. She offers advice on everything from career choices to what to wear. She says it's because she cares, because she wants the best for her daughter. And she means it. She does care. She does want the best. But underneath that care is something else. A need to be needed. A fear of irrelevance. An identity built on being a mother. And what happens to that identity when the child no longer needs mothering? The daughter feels suffocated but guilty. How can she push away someone who loves her so much? How can she reject someone who's only trying to help? So she accepts the calls, the advice, the involvement. But she starts to feel smaller, less capable, less confident in her own judgment. Because the constant message, however loving the delivery, is that she needs guidance, that she can't be trusted to make her own decisions, that she's still a child who needs a parent's wisdom. This is love as control, not intentional. Not malicious, but control nonetheless. The mother is meeting her own needs, her need to feel important, to feel necessary, to maintain a role that gives her life meaning. And she's doing it at the cost of her daughter's autonomy. But she can't see this. In her story, she's the devoted mother. The daughter who pulls away is ungrateful, is making bad choices, is going to regret pushing away someone who only wants to help. The daughter eventually sets boundaries. She limits the calls. She stops sharing every detail of her life. She makes decisions without asking for input. The mother feels hurt, rejected, abandoned. She tells her friends about her ungrateful daughter. She doesn't understand what she did wrong. She gave everything. She loved completely. And this is how she's repaid. Both of them are right. Both of them are wrong. The mother did love. The mother did give. But she also controlled. She also suffocated. She also used love as a tool to meet her own needs. The daughter is not ungrateful. She's trying to become her own person, but she's also causing real pain to someone who genuinely cares about her. There's no villain here. There's just two people with different needs, different fears, different ideas about what love should look like. This is the complexity that Machiavelli understood, and that most relationship advice ignores. We want simple answers. We want to know who's right and who's wrong. We want clear rules about what love should look like. But human relationships are not simple. They're negotiations between competing needs, competing fears, competing visions of what life should be. And the people who navigate them best are not the most loving or the most selfless. They're the most conscious. They're the ones who can see their own needs clearly, articulate them honestly, and negotiate with the other person's needs in a way that honors both. This is Machiavellian love. Not cold, not calculating in the cruel sense, but strategic, conscious, aware that love is not just feeling. It's action, it's choice. It's the daily negotiation between what I want and what you want, between who I am and who you need me to be, between the relationship as it is and the relationship as it could be. Now let's talk about the workplace, because this is where Machiavellian dynamics are most visible, most accepted, most openly discussed. Everyone knows that office politics exist. Everyone knows that success is not just about competence. It's about relationships, perception, strategic positioning. And yet we still pretend to be shocked when someone gets promoted, not because they're the best at their job, but because they're the best at managing up, at making themselves visible, at taking credit and deflecting blame. Meet Jennifer. She's been at the company for 5 years. She works hard. She's competent. She meets her deadlines. She's a team player. But she's been passed over for promotion 3 times. Each time, she's told she's doing great. Keep up the good work. Your time will come. But her time never comes. Meanwhile, Marcus, who started 2 years after her, just got promoted to the position she wanted. Jennifer is bitter. She thinks it's unfair. She thinks Marcus is less qualified. And she might be right. But Marcus understands something Jennifer doesn't. Competence is table stakes. Everyone at this level is competent. What separates those who rise from those who plateau is visibility, relationships, and the ability to shape perception. Marcus makes sure his wins are visible. When he completes a project, he doesn't just submit it. He presents it. He sends updates to stakeholders. He frames his work in terms of company goals and values. He makes sure the right people know what he's accomplished. Jennifer just does the work and assumes it will speak for itself. It doesn't. In a busy organization, good work that's not visible might as well not exist. Marcus builds relationships with decision makers. He doesn't just talk to them about work. He asks about their weekends, their kids, their interests. He remembers details. He creates moments of connection. When promotion time comes, these decision makers don't just see a name on a list. They see Marcus, someone they know, someone they like, someone who feels like part of their tribe. Jennifer keeps her head down and focuses on work. She thinks socializing is a waste of time. She thinks her results should be enough. They're not. Marcus manages perception carefully. When something goes wrong, he takes responsibility in a way that actually makes him look good. He says, "I should have communicated better. I should have asked for help sooner. I've learned from this, and here's what I'll do differently." He turns failure into a story of growth. When Jennifer makes a mistake, she gets defensive. She explains all the reasons it wasn't really her fault. She might be right, but she looks like someone who can't take responsibility, who can't learn, who can't be trusted with more responsibility. Is Marcus manipulative? By some definitions, yes. He's consciously managing perception. He's strategically building relationships. He's framing his work in ways that serve his interests. But he's also not lying. His work is good. His relationships are genuine, even if they're also strategic. His framing is accurate, even if it's selective. He's simply conscious of the game and playing it well. Jennifer could call this unfair. She could insist that merit should be enough. She could maintain her moral high ground while watching others get promoted. Or she could learn the game, not to become fake, not to become manipulative in the cruel sense, but to become conscious of the fact that perception matters, relationships matter, visibility matters. To recognize that being good at your job is necessary but not sufficient. To understand that every organization is a social system, and navigating social systems requires social intelligence. This is what Machiavelli was really saying in The Prince. He wasn't advocating for cruelty or deception as goods in themselves. He was describing the world as it actually works, not as we wish it worked. And his advice was simple. If you want power, understand the mechanisms of power. If you want to rise, understand what actually leads to rising. Don't confuse what should work with what does work. Don't mistake your moral preferences for descriptions of reality. The person who refuses to play the game, who insists on purity, on doing things the right way regardless of results, that person might feel morally superior, but they rarely get the power to actually change anything. Meanwhile, the person who understands a game, who plays it consciously and well, that person gets the position, the platform, the influence to actually make things happen. The question is not whether to play the game. You're already playing it whether you admit it or not. The question is whether you play it consciously or unconsciously, skillfully or clumsily, in service of your values or in contradiction to them. Let's go even deeper. Let's talk about the masks we wear with ourselves. the stories we tell in the privacy of our own minds. Because this is where the real manipulation happens. This is where we convince ourselves that our selfishness is actually selflessness, that our fear is actually wisdom, that our cruelty is actually kindness. Think about the last time you judged someone harshly. Maybe it was someone who cut you off in traffic. Maybe it was a coworker who got credit for work you did. Maybe it was a friend who canceled plans at the last minute. In that moment of judgment, you created a story. They're selfish. They're inconsiderate. They're a bad person. And in creating that story, you felt righteous. You felt justified in your anger, your resentment, your contempt. But here's what you didn't do. You didn't imagine their full humanity. You didn't consider that the person who cut you off might be rushing to the hospital, that the coworker who took credit might be desperately insecure and terrified of being fired, that the friend who canceled might be struggling with depression and barely able to get out of bed. You reduced them to a single action, a single moment, a single story that confirmed what you already felt. This is not because you're a bad person. This is because your brain is efficient. It takes shortcuts. It creates simple narratives, because complex ones require too much energy. And the simplest narrative is always the one where you're right and they're wrong, where you're the victim and they're the villain, where your actions are justified and theirs are not. But notice what happens when you're the one who cuts someone off in traffic. Suddenly, the story is different. You're not selfish. You're in a hurry for a good reason. You made a mistake. You're human. You deserve understanding, compassion, forgiveness. The same action that made someone else a villain makes you a sympathetic character in your own story. This is called the fundamental attribution error. When others do something bad, we attribute it to their character. When we do something bad, we attribute it to circumstances. This is self-manipulation at its most basic. We maintain our self-image as good people by applying different standards to ourselves than we apply to others. We judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions. We remember our kindnesses and forget our cruelties. We exaggerate the harm done to us and minimize the harm we do to others. And we do all of this unconsciously, automatically, without any awareness that we're distorting reality to protect our ego. Freud would say this is the ego defending itself against the superego's harsh judgments. Jung would say this is the persona protecting itself from the shadow. But Machiavelli would say this is simply how humans maintain the internal coherence necessary to function. If we truly saw ourselves as we are, if we acknowledged every selfish impulse, every cruel thought, every moment of cowardice and pettiness and spite, we would be paralyzed by shame. So we don't see. We construct a narrative that allows us to live with ourselves. And that narrative is always more flattering than reality. The cost of this self-deception is that we can't grow. We can't change patterns we refuse to see. We can't fix problems we won't acknowledge. We stay stuck in the same cycles, making the same mistakes, hurting the same people in the same ways, and wondering why our lives never seem to improve. The path to consciousness, to real self-awareness, requires something brutal. It requires looking at yourself with the same harsh judgment you apply to others. It requires asking, if someone else did what I just did, what would I think of them? It requires catching yourself in the act of self-justification and saying, wait, is that really true? Or is that just the story I'm telling myself to feel better? This is not comfortable. This is not pleasant. This is why most people never do it. It's easier to stay unconscious, to keep telling the flattering stories, to keep blaming circumstances and other people for our problems. But the people who do this work, who develop the capacity to see themselves clearly, they gain something invaluable. They gain choice. Because you can't change what you can't see. And once you see your patterns, your defenses, your self-deceptions, you can choose differently. Let's examine a specific pattern. The pattern of victimhood. This is one of the most seductive masks we wear, both for others and for ourselves. The victim is always sympathetic. The victim is never responsible. The victim deserves compassion, support, special treatment. And sometimes, people really are victims. Sometimes, terrible things happen that are genuinely not their fault. But victimhood can also become an identity, a strategy, a way of navigating the world that absolves us of responsibility and guarantees us attention. Meet Rachel. Rachel has had a hard life. Genuinely hard. Abusive childhood. Toxic relationships. Health problems. Financial struggles. She's been dealt a bad hand, and she has every right to feel angry about it. But somewhere along the way, victimhood became her identity. Every conversation circles back to her suffering. Every problem in her life is someone else's fault. Her boss is unfair. Her friends are unsupportive. Her family is toxic. The world is against her. And here's the thing. She's not entirely wrong. Her boss is difficult. Her friends are sometimes unsupportive. Her family is dysfunctional. But by framing everything through the lens of victimhood, by refusing to see any way in which she contributes to her problems, she stays stuck. She can't change her boss, her friends, or her family. So if they're the problem, she's helpless. She's at the mercy of forces beyond her control. And that helplessness becomes a kind of comfort. Because if she's helpless, she's not responsible. If she's not responsible, she doesn't have to change. She doesn't have to do the hard work of examining her own patterns, her own choices, her own role in creating the life she has. Her friends start to pull away. Not because they don't care, but because every interaction is draining. Every conversation is about Rachel's problems. Every offer of help is met with reasons why it won't work. They start to feel used, manipulated, exhausted. But when they create distance, Rachel sees it as more evidence that people are terrible, that she can't trust anyone, that she's all alone in a cruel world. She doesn't see how her constant focus on her own suffering makes her difficult to be around. She doesn't see how her refusal to take any responsibility pushes people away. She only sees that people keep leaving, and that confirms her story that she's a victim. This is the trap of victimhood. It provides secondary gains: attention, sympathy, absolution from responsibility. And those gains can become addictive. The person becomes invested in their suffering because their suffering is their identity, their currency, their way of relating to others. Letting go of victimhood would mean letting go of all those gains. It would mean facing the terrifying possibility that they have more power than they've admitted, which means they're more responsible than they've admitted, which means they could have made different choices, which means some of their suffering was avoidable. That realization is devastating. It's easier to stay a victim. It's easier to keep blaming others. It's easier to maintain the story that the world is cruel and you're powerless. But that ease comes at a cost. The cost is your life. The cost is staying stuck in patterns that don't serve you. The cost is pushing away people who care about you. The cost is never discovering what you're actually capable of when you stop waiting for the world to save you and start saving yourself. Machiavelli would look at Rachel and say, "You're using victimhood as a strategy. It's not working. It's not getting you what you actually want, but you keep using it because it's getting you something. Attention, sympathy, the comfort of not being responsible. Until you're willing to give up those secondary gains, you'll stay stuck. And that's a choice. You might not see it as a choice. You might experience it as helplessness, but it's a choice nonetheless. Now let's talk about the opposite mask, the mask of strength. The person who never admits weakness, never asks for help, never shows vulnerability. This mask is especially common in men, but women wear it too. It's the mask that says, "I'm fine. I've got this. I don't need anyone." And like all masks, it serves a purpose. It protects against the shame of neediness, the fear of rejection, the vulnerability of depending on others. Meet James. James is successful by conventional measures. Good job. Nice house. Stable relationship. But he's exhausted. He's been carrying everything alone for so long that he doesn't remember what it feels like to share the weight. His partner asks if he's okay. He says he's fine. His friends invite him to talk about what's going on. He changes the subject. His therapist tries to dig deeper. He intellectualizes, analyzes, explains, but never actually feels. James learned early that showing weakness was dangerous. Maybe his father mocked him when he cried. Maybe his mother was too fragile to handle his emotions. Maybe his peers bullied him for being sensitive. Whatever the origin, the lesson stuck. Vulnerability equals danger. Strength equals safety. So he built walls. Thick walls. Walls so high and so strong that nothing could hurt him. But nothing could reach him either. His partner feels lonely in the relationship, not because James doesn't care, but because he won't let her in. She sees him struggling and wants to help, but he won't admit he's struggling. He won't show her the parts of himself that are scared, confused, overwhelmed. He only shows her the strong version, the capable version, the version that has everything under control. And she's tired of relating to a mask. She wants the real person underneath. But James has worn the mask so long he's not sure there's anything underneath anymore. This is the cost of the strength mask. It protects you from vulnerability, but it also protects you from intimacy. Because intimacy requires vulnerability. It requires letting someone see you when you're not strong, when you're not capable, when you're not in control. It requires trusting that they won't use your weakness against you, that they'll hold it gently, that they'll love you not despite your flaws, but including them. James is terrified of this, because if he lets the mask drop, if he shows his partner who he really is, she might leave. She might be disappointed. She might realize he's not as strong as she thought, and then he'll be alone. So he keeps the mask on, and in keeping it on, he guarantees the very outcome he fears, because his partner is already leaving, not because he's weak, but because he won't let her close enough to matter. Machiavelli would say James is using the wrong strategy for the wrong context. In politics, in war, in competitive environments, the strength mask works. Showing weakness invites attack. But in intimate relationships, the strength mask is counterproductive. It creates distance instead of connection. It inspires respect but not love. James is applying a political strategy to a personal relationship, and it's failing. But he can't see this because the mask has become his identity. He doesn't know how to be any other way. The path forward for James requires something terrifying. It requires taking off the mask, not all at once, but gradually. It requires small acts of vulnerability, admitting when he's tired, asking for help with something small, sharing a fear or a doubt, and seeing what happens. Does his partner use it against him? Or does she move closer? Does she lose respect? Or does she feel relief that he's finally letting her in? Most likely, she'll move closer, because most people don't want to be with a perfect, invulnerable partner. They want to be with a human, someone who struggles and succeeds, who's strong sometimes and weak sometimes, who needs them as much as they need him. But James won't know this until he tries. And trying requires risking the very thing he spent his life protecting against. Rejection, abandonment, the confirmation that he's not enough. This is the paradox of masks. We wear them to protect ourselves, but they often create the very outcomes we fear. The victim mask pushes people away while claiming to need them. The strength mask creates loneliness while claiming to be self-sufficient. The nice person mask builds resentment while claiming to be selfless. We think the mask is keeping us safe, but it's actually keeping us stuck. Let's talk about that nice person mask, because it's one of the most common and most misunderstood. The person who's always agreeable, always accommodating, always putting others first. They seem selfless. They seem kind. But underneath, there's often a different dynamic at work. Meet Lisa. Lisa is known as the nice one. She never says no. She volunteers for everything. She's always available to help. Her friends love her because she's so easy to be around. She never complains. She never makes demands. She never causes problems. But Lisa is exhausted. She's resentful. She feels used. But she can't say anything because that would make her not nice. And being nice is her identity, her value, her way of ensuring people love her. Lisa learned early that her needs didn't matter. Maybe her parents were overwhelmed and she learned to be the easy child. Maybe she was bullied and learned that being agreeable kept her safe. Maybe she was praised for being helpful and learned that her worth came from serving others. Whatever the origin, the pattern is set. She gets her needs met indirectly, by meeting others' needs first. She earns love through service. She maintains relationships through self-sacrifice. But here's what's really happening. Lisa is not actually selfless. She's strategic. She gives in order to receive. She helps in order to be valued. She accommodates in order to be loved. There's nothing wrong with this. This is how social exchange works. But Lisa can't admit this, even to herself. She has to believe she's genuinely selfless, genuinely kind, genuinely without needs of her own. Because if she admitted she's giving in order to get, she'd have to face the fact that she's manipulating people, just in a socially acceptable way. And when people don't reciprocate the way she expects, when they take her help without giving back, when they don't appreciate her sacrifices, she feels betrayed. She feels used. But she can't say anything because that would reveal the transaction. It would reveal that her giving wasn't actually selfless. It was an investment, and she expected a return. So she stays silent. She keeps giving, and the resentment builds. Eventually, Lisa explodes. Or she withdraws. Or she gets sick, because the body keeps score even when the mind refuses to. All that unexpressed anger, all that unacknowledged resentment, all those unmet needs, they don't disappear. They leak out in passive aggression, in mysterious illnesses, in sudden dramatic exits from relationships. And everyone is shocked. Lisa was so nice. What happened? They don't see the years of accumulated resentment. They don't see the cost of the nice mask. They only see the explosion, and it seems to come from nowhere. Machiavelli would say Lisa is using an ineffective strategy. She's trying to control people through self-sacrifice, but it's not working. She's not getting what she wants. She's getting exhausted and resentful instead. A more effective strategy would be direct negotiation, saying what she needs, asking for what she wants, setting boundaries. But that would require giving up the nice mask. It would require risking that people might not like her if she's not always accommodating. And that risk feels unbearable. So she stays stuck. She keeps giving. She keeps resenting. She keeps wondering why people don't appreciate her more. And she never sees that the problem is not other people's ingratitude. The problem is her inability to be direct about her needs. The problem is the mask she wears that says she has no needs, that she's happy to serve, that she doesn't require reciprocity. People believe the mask. They take her at her word, and then she resents them for it. This is the fundamental problem with unconscious manipulation. It doesn't work. Not in the long term. Not for building real relationships. Not for getting what you actually want. Because when you're unconscious of your strategies, you can't adjust them. You can't see when they're failing. You just keep doing the same thing and wondering why it's not working. Conscious manipulation, if we can even call it that, is different. It's negotiation. It's strategy. It's the recognition that every interaction involves an exchange and being clear about what you're offering and what you want in return. This is not cold. This is not cruel. This is honest. It's saying, I'll help you with this if you help me with that. I'll give you my time if you give me your attention. I'll be vulnerable with you if you're vulnerable with me. This is how healthy relationships work. Clear exchanges, explicit agreements, mutual benefit. But we're taught that this is wrong. We're taught that real love is selfless. Real friendship is unconditional. Real kindness expects nothing in return. And maybe in some ideal world, that's true. But in this world, in the world of actual humans with actual needs and actual limitations, relationships are exchanges. And pretending they're not, pretending that we give without expecting anything back, that's not virtue. That's self-deception. And it leads to resentment, to burnout, to the slow death of relationships under the weight of unspoken expectations. Machiavelli was honest about power. He said the quiet part out loud. He described the mechanisms that everyone uses, but no one admits to using. And that's why he's still controversial 500 years later. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right in a way that makes us uncomfortable. He held up a mirror to human nature, and we didn't like what we saw. Freud tried to make us comfortable with that mirror. He said, yes, you have dark impulses, but they're unconscious. They're not really you. They're the ID, the primitive part that civilization has tamed. You're not responsible for your unconscious. You're only responsible for what you do with it once it becomes conscious. This is gentler. This is more forgiving, but it's also less empowering. Because if your darkness is unconscious, if it's not really you, then you're always at its mercy. You're always being driven by forces you don't understand and can't control. Machiavelli offers something different. He says, yes, you want power. Yes, you manipulate. Yes, you're strategic and self-interested. And that's fine. That's human. The question is not whether you do these things. The question is whether you do them consciously, skillfully. in service of goals you've actually chosen. The question is whether you're the author of your life or just a character in a story you don't understand. This is where Machiavelli and Jung actually converge. Jung said the path to wholeness requires integrating the shadow, acknowledging the parts of yourself you've rejected, bringing them into consciousness so they stop controlling you from the darkness. Machiavelli said the path to power requires understanding your actual motivations, your actual strategies, your actual nature, so you can use them effectively instead of being used by them. Both are saying the same thing. Consciousness is power. Self-knowledge is freedom. Not the freedom to be perfect, but the freedom to choose. To choose which impulses to act on and which to restrain. To choose which masks to wear and when to take them off. To choose which version of yourself to cultivate and which to let go. But here's the hard part. Consciousness is uncomfortable. It's easier to stay unconscious, to keep telling yourself flattering stories, to keep blaming others for your problems, to keep wearing masks without knowing you're wearing them. Consciousness requires looking at yourself honestly. It requires admitting that you're not as kind as you think, not as selfless as you claim, not as victimized as you feel. It requires seeing your own manipulation, your own cruelty, your own selfishness. And that's painful. This is why most people never do it. This is why most people stay stuck in the same patterns their whole lives. Not because they can't change, but because change requires first seeing what needs to change. And seeing what needs to change requires admitting that you're part of the problem. That your suffering is not just something that happens to you. It's something you participate in creating. That your relationships fail not just because other people are difficult, but because you're difficult too. That your life is the way it is not just because of circumstances, but because of choices you've made, patterns you've repeated, masks you've worn. This realization is devastating. It strips away the comfort of victimhood. It removes the excuse of unconsciousness. It puts responsibility squarely on your shoulders. And responsibility is heavy. It's much easier to say, I'm this way because of my childhood, because of my trauma, because of what was done to me. And maybe that's true. Maybe you were shaped by forces beyond your control. But at some point, you have to decide. Do you want to understand why you are the way you are? Or do you want to change? Understanding is comfortable. It provides explanation, context, compassion. Change is uncomfortable. It requires action, risk, the possibility of failure. Most people choose understanding. They spend years in therapy talking about their childhood, their trauma, their patterns, and they gain insight. They understand themselves better, but they don't change, because understanding is not the same as changing. Knowing why you do something is not the same as doing something different. Machiavelli would have no patience for this. He would say, you understand your patterns? Good. Now change them. You know why you're stuck? Good. Now get unstuck. You see your masks? Good. Now choose different ones. He was not interested in explanation. He was interested in effectiveness. And effectiveness requires action, not just insight. This is the gift of the Machiavellian perspective. It's ruthlessly practical. It asks, is this working? Is this getting you what you want? If not, why are you still doing it? And it doesn't accept excuses. It doesn't care about your childhood, your trauma, your reasons. It only cares about results. And if you're not getting the results you want, you need to change your strategy. This sounds harsh. It sounds uncompassionate. But there's a strange compassion in it, because it treats you as capable. It assumes you have agency. It refuses to infantilize you by saying you're helpless, you're damaged, you're at the mercy of your past. It says you're powerful, you're strategic, you're capable of change. You just have to choose it. And choice is the key. Not the illusion of choice, but real choice. The choice that comes from seeing clearly, from knowing your patterns, your masks, your strategies, from understanding what you're actually doing and why, from recognizing the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are, from accepting your shadow, your selfishness, your manipulation, not as things to be ashamed of, but as things to be conscious of. Because once you're conscious, you can choose. You can choose to manipulate or not. You can choose which mask to wear or whether to wear one at all. You can choose to pursue power or to pursue something else. You can choose to be strategic or to be spontaneous. You can choose to protect yourself or to be vulnerable. None of these choices are inherently right or wrong. They're just choices, and the quality of your life depends on making them consciously instead of unconsciously. Let's bring this back to the concrete. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice. How do you become more conscious? How do you see your masks? How do you integrate your shadow? How do you move from unconscious manipulation to conscious choice? First, you have to be willing to be wrong about yourself. You have to be willing to discover that you're not who you think you are, that the story you've been telling about yourself is incomplete, distorted, self-serving. This is hard. We're invested in our self-image. We've built our entire identity around it. Questioning it feels like questioning our existence. But it's necessary, because the self-image is always a mask. It's always a construction. And underneath it is something more complex, more contradictory, more human. Second, you have to pay attention to your impact on others. Not your intentions, your impact. Because we judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their impact. We say, "I didn't mean to hurt you," as if that absolves us. But impact matters more than intention. If you keep hurting people, even with good intentions, something is wrong. Not with them, with you, with your patterns, your blind spots, your unconscious strategies. And you have to be willing to see that. Third, you have to notice your patterns, the situations that keep repeating, the relationships that keep failing in the same way, the conflicts that keep arising around the same issues. These are not coincidences. These are not bad luck. These are patterns. And you're the common denominator. Something in you is creating these situations, attracting these dynamics, perpetuating these problems. And until you see what that something is, you'll keep repeating the pattern. Fourth, you have to get curious about your defenses. When do you get defensive? When do you deflect? When do you change the subject? When do you intellectualize instead of feeling? When do you blame instead of taking responsibility? These defensive reactions are protecting something. Some belief about yourself that you're not willing to question. Some truth you're not willing to face. And that's exactly where you need to look. Not to judge yourself, not to shame yourself, but to see yourself. To understand what you're protecting and why. Fifth, you have to practice vulnerability. Not the performative kind. Not the strategic sharing that's designed to create connection while maintaining control. But real vulnerability. The kind that's uncomfortable. The kind that risks rejection. The kind that shows people who you actually are, not who you want them to think you are. This is terrifying, but it's also the only path to real intimacy, real connection, real relationships that aren't based on masks and performances. Sixth, you have to accept that you're manipulative. Not in the cruel sense, not in the sociopathic sense, but in the human sense. You influence people. You manage perceptions. You present strategic versions of yourself. You give in order to receive. You're nice in order to be liked. You're strong in order to be respected. You're vulnerable in order to create connection. These are not sins. These are strategies. And they're fine as long as you're conscious of them. As long as you're choosing them instead of being driven by them. As long as you're using them in service of values you've actually chosen instead of just repeating patterns you learned in childhood. Seventh, you have to develop the capacity to hold contradictions. You're both selfish and generous, both cruel and kind, both manipulative and authentic, both strong and weak. You're not one thing. You're multiple things, often at the same time. And that's okay. That's human. The problem is not the contradictions. The problem is refusing to see them, insisting that you're only good, only kind, only selfless. That insistence is what creates the shadow. That insistence is what makes the rejected parts grow strong in the darkness. Eighth, you have to practice making conscious choices. Small ones at first. Noticing when you're about to put on a mask and choosing whether to wear it. Noticing when you're about to manipulate and choosing whether to be direct instead. Noticing when you're about to blame someone else and choosing whether to take responsibility. These moments of choice are where change happens. Not in grand revelations, not in dramatic transformations, but in small, repeated choices to act differently than your patterns would dictate. Ninth, you have to find people who can see you clearly. Not people who flatter you. Not people who enable your patterns. But people who love you enough to tell you the truth. People who will say, "You're doing that thing again. You're wearing that mask again. You're manipulating again." And you have to be willing to hear it. Not to defend, not to explain, but to consider that they might be right. That they might see something you can't see. That their perspective might be valuable even if it's uncomfortable. 10th, you have to accept that this work never ends. You don't arrive at perfect consciousness. You don't achieve complete self-knowledge. You don't transcend your humanity. You just get better at seeing yourself. Better at catching your patterns. Better at choosing consciously instead of reacting unconsciously. And that's enough. That's everything. Because the difference between a conscious life and an unconscious life is not perfection. It's choice. It's agency. It's the capacity to shape your life instead of being shaped by forces you don't understand. This is what Machiavelli understood that Freud didn't. Freud wanted to heal people, to make them whole, to resolve their conflicts and integrate their psyches. And that's beautiful. That's compassionate. But it's also somewhat naive. Because humans are not meant to be conflict-free. We're not meant to be integrated in the sense of being unified, consistent, harmonious. We're meant to be complex, contradictory, multiple. And the goal is not to resolve that complexity, but to navigate it consciously. Machiavelli was not trying to heal anyone. He was trying to empower them, to give them tools, to show them how power actually works so they could use it effectively. And power, in this sense, is not just political power. It's personal power. The power to shape your life. The power to influence your relationships. The power to choose who you become instead of being passively shaped by circumstances and conditioning. This is why his work is still relevant. This is why it still makes people uncomfortable. Because he's describing something true about human nature that we'd rather not acknowledge. We'd rather believe we're purely good. Purely motivated by love and altruism and noble intentions. We'd rather believe that power is something other people seek, not us. We'd rather believe that manipulation is something bad people do, not something we all do every day in countless small ways. But believing these comfortable lies keeps us unconscious. It keeps us stuck. It keeps us from seeing ourselves clearly and therefore from changing. And the cost of that unconsciousness is enormous. It's failed relationships. It's repeated patterns. It's lives lived on autopilot, driven by conditioning we don't understand, wearing masks we don't know we're wearing, hurting people we don't mean to hurt, and wondering why we're not happier, not more successful, not more fulfilled. The path to something better requires something brutal. It requires looking at yourself the way Machiavelli looked at princes, not with judgment, not with moralism, but with clear-eyed assessment. What are you actually doing? What are you actually trying to achieve? What strategies are you actually using? Are they working? If not, why are you still using them? And what would you need to do differently to get different results? These are not comfortable questions. They don't lead to comfortable answers, but they lead to truth. And truth, however uncomfortable, is more useful than comfortable illusions, because you can't change what you can't see. You can't fix problems you won't acknowledge. You can't grow beyond patterns you refuse to recognize. So here we are, at the end of this exploration. And what have we discovered? That everyone wears masks. That everyone manipulates. That everyone is strategic, self-interested, driven by needs they often don't acknowledge. That Machiavelli was right about human nature in ways that make us uncomfortable. That Freud was right about the unconscious, but perhaps too optimistic about our ability to transcend it. That Jung was right about the shadow and the necessity of integrating it. But more than that, we've discovered that none of this makes us bad. It makes us human. The question is not whether we wear masks. We all do. The question is whether we know we're wearing them, whether we choose them consciously, whether we use them in service of values we've actually chosen, or just repeat patterns we learned before we were old enough to question them. The question is not whether we manipulate. We all do. The question is whether we manipulate consciously or unconsciously, whether we're honest about what we're doing or delude ourselves into thinking we're purely altruistic, whether we manipulate in ways that serve mutual benefit or in ways that serve only ourselves at others' expense. The question is not whether we're selfish. We all are. The question is whether we can acknowledge our selfishness and negotiate it with others' selfishness in ways that create relationships of mutual benefit, or whether we hide our selfishness behind masks of selflessness and then resent people for not meeting needs we never admitted having. The question is not whether we have shadows. We all do. The question is whether we're willing to look at them, to acknowledge the parts of ourselves we've rejected, to integrate the anger, the selfishness, the cruelty, the weakness, the neediness, all the things we've decided are not acceptable, not us, not part of our self-image. Because those rejected parts don't disappear. They grow strong in the darkness. They leak out in ways we don't recognize. They sabotage our lives while we blame everyone else. This is the work. Not becoming perfect, not transcending your humanity, not achieving some state of enlightened selflessness, but becoming conscious, seeing yourself clearly, knowing your patterns, your masks, your strategies, accepting your complexity, your contradictions, your shadow, and from that place of consciousness, making choices, real choices, not reactions, not conditioning, not unconscious patterns, but conscious choices about who you want to be, how you want to relate, what you want to create with your life. This is hard work. It's uncomfortable work. It's work that never ends. But it's also the only work that matters. Because everything else, all your achievements, all your relationships, all your experiences, they're all filtered through who you are. And if you don't know who you are, if you're unconscious of your patterns and masks and strategies, then you're not really living your life. You're being lived by forces you don't understand. You're a character in a story you didn't write. You're wearing masks you didn't choose. But when you become conscious, when you see yourself clearly, when you integrate your shadow and choose your masks and navigate your complexity with awareness, then you become the author of your life. Not in the sense of controlling everything. You can't control circumstances. You can't control other people. You can't control what happens to you. But you can control how you respond. You can control which version of yourself you cultivate. You can control whether you repeat your patterns or break them. You can control whether you stay stuck or grow. And that's power. Real power. Not the power to control others. Not the power to dominate or manipulate or win. But the power to choose. The power to shape yourself. The power to live consciously instead of unconsciously. The power to be the person you actually want to be instead of the person your conditioning made you. This is what Machiavelli was really teaching. Not how to be cruel, not how to be manipulative, but how to be conscious of power dynamics so you can navigate them effectively. How to see the world as it actually is instead of as you wish it were. How to be strategic without being dishonest. How to pursue your interests without pretending you don't have any. How to be human without being naive about what that means. And this is what Freud was really teaching. Not that you're damaged, not that you're at the mercy of your unconscious, but that understanding yourself, bringing the unconscious into consciousness, gives you freedom. Not freedom from your nature, but freedom to work with your nature instead of against it. Freedom to see your patterns instead of being controlled by them. Freedom to choose your responses instead of just reacting. And this is what Jung was really teaching. Not that you need to become perfect. Not that you need to eliminate your shadow, but that you need to integrate it. To acknowledge all the parts of yourself, even the ones you don't like. To hold the contradictions. To be complex and contradictory and multiple and still somehow whole. Not whole in the sense of unified, but whole in the sense of complete. Nothing rejected. Nothing hidden. Everything seen, acknowledged, integrated. These three thinkers, so different in their approaches, are all pointing to the same truth. Consciousness is the path. Self-knowledge is the goal. Not knowledge for its own sake, but knowledge that leads to choice. Knowledge that leads to power. Knowledge that leads to freedom. So what do you do with this knowledge? How do you apply it? How do you move from understanding to action? You start small. You start with noticing. Noticing when you put on a mask. Noticing when you manipulate. Noticing when you blame others for problems you're contributing to. Noticing when you tell yourself flattering stories that aren't quite true. Just noticing. Not judging. Not trying to change yet. Just seeing. Because seeing is the first step. You can't change what you can't see. And most of us are blind to our own patterns. We see everyone else's masks, but not our own. We see everyone else's manipulation, but not our own. We see everyone else's selfishness, but not our own. So the first work is simply to see, to develop the capacity to observe yourself the way you observe others, with the same clarity, with the same lack of bias, with the same willingness to see what's actually there instead of what you want to be there. Then, once you can see, you start to choose. Small choices at first. Choosing to be direct instead of manipulative. Choosing to take responsibility instead of blaming. Choosing to be vulnerable instead of defended. Choosing to acknowledge your needs instead of pretending you don't have any. These choices will feel uncomfortable. They'll feel risky. They'll feel like you're giving up protection you need. But you make them anyway, and you see what happens. Most likely, what happens is better than you feared. People respond to honesty. They respond to vulnerability. They respond to directness. Not always. Not everyone. But more often than you'd think. And even when they don't. Even when being honest leads to conflict or rejection. At least you know. At least you're dealing with reality instead of managing perceptions. At least you're living authentically instead of performing constantly. And gradually, through repeated small choices, you change. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But incrementally. You become more conscious. More aware. More capable of seeing yourself clearly and choosing consciously. You become less reactive and more responsive. Less driven by unconscious patterns and more guided by conscious values. Less controlled by your conditioning and more free to choose who you become. This is the promise. Not perfection. Not transcendence. Not some idealized version of yourself that never struggles or fails or acts selfishly. But consciousness, choice, agency, the capacity to shape your life instead of being passively shaped by it. The capacity to see your masks and choose whether to wear them. The capacity to acknowledge your shadow and integrate it instead of being controlled by it. The capacity to be fully human, with all the complexity and contradiction that entails, and still somehow be free. This is what's possible. This is what's available. Not to special people, not to the enlightened few, but to anyone willing to do the work. The uncomfortable work of seeing themselves clearly. The difficult work of acknowledging their patterns. The vulnerable work of taking off their masks. The courageous work of integrating their shadow. The ongoing work of choosing consciously instead of reacting unconsciously. It's not easy. It's never easy. But it's worth it. Because the alternative is staying unconscious. Staying stuck. Staying controlled by patterns you don't understand. Wearing masks you didn't choose. Repeating the same mistakes. Hurting the same people. Wondering why your life never changes. And that's not living. That's just existing. That's just going through the motions. That's just playing a role in a script you didn't write. But when you become conscious, when you see clearly, when you choose deliberately, then you're living. Really living. Not perfectly. Not without struggle. Not without pain or failure or regret. But consciously. Authentically. Freely. And that makes all the difference. So here's the invitation. Look at your masks. Really look at them. See the ways you perform. The ways you manipulate. The ways you hide. Not to judge yourself. Not to shame yourself. But to see yourself. To know yourself. To understand the strategies you use and why you use them. Then ask yourself, are these strategies working? Are they getting you what you actually want? Are they creating the relationships you want? Are they building the life you want? If yes, great. Keep using them. But use them consciously. Know what you're doing and why. Choose them deliberately instead of just repeating them automatically. If no, if your strategies aren't working, if you're stuck in patterns that don't serve you, then you have a choice. You can keep doing what you're doing and hope for different results. Or you can try something different, something uncomfortable, something risky, something that requires taking off the mask and showing people who you actually are. This is terrifying. This is vulnerable. This is everything your conditioning tells you not to do. But it's also the only path to something real, to relationships that aren't based on performance, to a life that isn't based on hiding, to a self that isn't fragmented into acceptable and unacceptable parts. And so the curtain falls on this act. But the show continues, inside each of us, in the silence of our thoughts. The mask we've analyzed today, you may know it well. You may wear it, or perhaps you see it in someone you love. The comment section below is not a place for judgment. It's our stage for confessions, a safe space for observers. Use that space to share your story. What mask did you have to wear to survive? We want to hear from you. And if you felt understood here, subscribe. Because here, you are not alone. Together, we'll keep unraveling human theater, one mask at a time. The next act is about to begin.